Welcome to Financial Accounting. My name is Richard Fisonga, your financial accounting tutor. This lesson is part 2B in a series of 4 lessons on the limitations of the trial balance and the suspense account. And to be specific, this lesson is on errors not revealed by the trial balance. In this lesson, you are expected to do the following. Number 1, explain the errors not revealed by the trial balance. And number 2, prepare journal entries to correct errors not revealed by the trial balance. Errors not revealed by the trial balance are defined as those errors which cannot be detected by the trial balance. So with such errors, the trial balance may agree even if the ledger accounts are in error. The errors not revealed by the trial balance that we have covered so far in part 2A are 1. Errors of commission, 2. Errors of omission, 3. Errors of principal. So in case you want to see how these were covered together with the examples and the workings, well, you need to watch part 2A of these videos. For in this particular segment of part 2, we're going to look at the following errors. Number 1, we shall look at errors of original entry, errors of compensation, errors of complete reversal, and errors of transposition. As we go through this lesson, I still want you to remember the very basics on which this lesson is founded. This topic has a foundation, and if you grasp the concepts in that foundation, then everything will be well for you. So let's take a look at the summary of addition and subtraction rules in ledger accounts as they pertain to this topic. Remember the 2 gentlemen that we discussed in the last video. We said these are the superheroes for our time, and these are the superheroes that will save the day. We called them Des and Clerk, and we said that these summarize all the rules of addition and subtraction that would ever come across in accounts. We said that Des stands for debit assets, costs, and expenses, whereas Clerk stands for credit liabilities, equity, and gains. We also discussed that if you want to add to an asset, to a cost, and to an expense, what do? You debit those respective accounts. And if you want to subtract, therefore, from assets, costs, and expenses, you credit these accounts. If you want to add to accounts of liabilities, equity, and gains, you simply credit these accounts. And the reverse goes. If you want to subtract from liabilities, equity, and gains, you debit the liabilities, equity, and gains accounts. So this is a summary of these particular addition and subtraction rules in ledger accounts. What are the steps that we're going to follow in correcting errors not revealed by the trial balance? This is just a reminder again. For purposes of clarity, we shall use the reverse approach. So step 1, we shall show how the error was committed in the ledger account. Step 2, we shall make entries in the ledger to correct the errors. And step 3, we shall show the correcting entries in the journal, which we call journalizing. So let's now continue with the errors. We are now going to look at the errors of original entry. What are errors of original entry, or what is an error of original entry? This is an error where a wrong amount for a transaction is entered in the books of original entry or source document, and it is subsequently posted to the ledger accounts. This error may result in either undercasting or overcasting figures in the respective accounts. When we say overcast, what we mean is that the amount entered in the ledger accounts is greater than the correct value, meaning we have entered more than what we should have entered. The amount in the ledger entered is more than the actual figure. And when we say error of undercast, we mean that the amount entered is less than the correct value, meaning there is less in the ledger account than what should have been there. Therefore, here we're talking simply about adding to what is less and subtracting from what is more. To correct an error of original entry, what do? You first of all ascertain whether the error resulted in undercasting or overcasting the original amount. Secondly, if it resulted in an overcast, reverse the error by entering the amount of the overcast on the opposite side of the two accounts. If it resulted in an undercast, add the difference, the amount of the undercast, by posting the difference to the same sides as the amounts earlier entered. Okay, let us now take a look at the problems concerning errors not disclosed by the trial balance. In this question that I present to you, part 1 and 2 of the question have something to do with errors of original entry. So let's take a look at number 1. It says, an invoice for the purchase of goods by check for $44,000 was entered in the books as $40,000. So in this particular question, let's take a look at what the problem is. The problem is that a check for $44,000 was paid, but what was entered in the books was $40,000. So clearly we can see that the check was 44, but what was entered was 40. So this was an undercast by 4,000 kwacha. The amount entered in the records was less by 4,000 kwacha. So what are we going to do in order for us to correct this? Let us now take a look at how this error was made. This error was made by entering a 40,000 kwacha on the debit side of the purchases account instead of 44. So we need to add 4,000 to 40,000 to make it 44. How do we add to an expense account? We add by debiting the amount that we are adding. And also we are looking at an asset account, the bank account. 40,000 kwacha was subtracted by making this credit entry instead of 44,000. So how are we going now to make sure that the 44,000 was actually subtracted? We enter the remaining figure, 4,000, on the credit side as well. So that in total, we are going to have 40 plus 4, which is 44,000, and a 40 there plus 4, which is also 44,000. Therefore, in the journal, all we are going to do is we shall show two entries, the entries that we are making to correct the error. So the entries that we are making are, number 1, we are debiting the purchases account with 4,000 and we are crediting the bank account. So in the general journal, all we are saying is debit purchases account and credit bank account. And this being the correction of an error whereby purchases were undercast by $4,000. We now look at part 2 of the question, which says a payment for rent by cash $10,000 was entered in both the rent and cash accounts as $11,000. So clearly, in this particular context, we can see that the amount $10,000 is what should have been entered, but what was entered instead was $11,000. So this is an error where the amount that was entered was more than what should have been entered. So there was an overcast of the amount in both accounts. Let's now take a look at how this error was made in the ledger accounts and how the... So what are we expected to do here? Let's take a look at this. $11,000 was entered on the debit side of the rent account instead of $10,000. The same thing was done. $11,000 was entered on the credit side of the cash account instead of $10,000. So what should we do? We should subtract 1,000 from the 11,000. What do we do in expense accounts if we are reducing the expense? We credit the expense account. Therefore, we credit the rent account with $1,000 so that if we balance this account, what we should be able to remain with is a $10,000 on the debit side. In the same line, we debit the cash account with $1,000 so that if we balance the cash account, we should be able to remain with $10,000 on the credit side. Now, how should in the journal, all we are going to show are the corrective entries. So we shall show that the cash account should be debited with $1,000 and the rent account should be credited with $1,000. This is a correction of rent payment which was overcast by $1,000. Let's take a look at the errors of compensation. What is an error of compensation? This is where an error on the debit side of one account cancels an error of equal amount on the credit side of another account by coincidence. This error will result in either undercasting or overcasting two different accounts on the opposite sides of the trial balance. Therefore, compensating errors are corrected by adding or subtracting the difference through debiting one account and crediting the other account. Let's see how this ought to be done. We get back to the question. So part 3 and 4 of this question deals with the error of compensation. Part 3 says, the sales and purchases accounts were overcast by $15,000. How was this error made? Let's take a look at the ledger account. The purchases account, we are told, was overcast by 15,000, meaning that there was a 15,000 kwacha on the debit side of the purchases account which should not have been there. And there was also a $15,000 on the credit side of the sales account which should not have been there. So what do? We cancel this $15,000 by subtracting. How do we subtract from an expense account? We credit. So we make an opposite entry on the credit side of the purchases account to cancel this $15,000. And in the same line, in the sales account, we make an entry on the debit side of the sales account to make a cancellation of this $15,000 which was an overcast. So in this way, we have cancelled these two errors. Now, what are we going to write in the journals? What we are going to write in the journals is that we must credit the purchases account and we must debit the sales account with $15,000 respectively. So let's take a look at this. The journal. So sales account should be debited with $15,000 and the purchases account should be credited with $15,000 to correct this error, being the correction of error whereby purchases and sales were overcast by $15,000. Let's now move to the next part of the question. Part 4 says both the discount received account and discount allowed account were undercast by $3,500. So these were less, each of these accounts were less by $3,500. So what we need to do is add to them. So look at this. The discount received account is an income account, a gains account. What do we do to add to a gains account? We credit. Therefore, we're going to credit the $3,500 to the discount received account. And the discount allowed account is an expense account. What do we do to add to an expense account? We debit. So we're going to debit the discount allowed account with $3,500. Let's see how we do it in the ledger accounts. In the ledger accounts, we know that this side was less by $3,500 and this side was also less by $3,500. And so what we do, all we do is add the $3,500 to the discount allowed account by debiting it, and also add to the discount received account the $3,500 by crediting it. Let's see how we're going to show this in the journal. In the journal, all we're going to do is say debit the discount allowed account with $3,500 and credit the discount received account with $3,500, being correction of an undercast error of $3,500 in the discount allowed and discount received accounts, which compensated each other. So that is the explanation. Let's move on to the next question. An error of complete reversal occurs where the double entry for a transaction is completely reversed by debiting the account that should have been credited and crediting the account that should have been debited. So in this case, correct accounts are used, but the amounts are shown on the wrong sides of the accounts. To correct an error of complete reversal, you need to apply the double entry system and double the amount. For example, if 5,000 was wrongly entered on the credit side, you enter 1,000 on the debit side. Why should we do this? The first 500 is for cancelling the 500 entered on the credit side, and the second 500 is the actual amount that should have been entered in the first place. So let's see how this can be dealt with in the question. In this question, we are now paying attention to part 5. It says, a sale of stock by cash $5,000 was wrongly credited to the cash account and debited to the sales account. Let's see how this error was made in the ledger accounts. In the ledger accounts, the sales account was debited with 5,000 instead of being credited with 5,000. And then the cash account was credited with 5,000 instead of being debited with 5,000. So the first thing that we are going to do is to cancel this entry. How do we cancel this entry? It's by making an opposite entry on the other side. So we shall have the first $5,000 entered on the credit side to cancel the 5,000 on the debit side. And then since these have cancelled each other, it means that there is nothing remaining in this account. Therefore, what we need to do next is make an entry of the actual amount that should have been entered. So we're making an entry of another 5,000 on the credit side. So if we are to make just one entry, it means that we are adding the first $5,000 to the second $5,000, which gives us $10,000. So to cancel this error, we are making an opposite entry of $10,000 to cancel the first 5,000 so that we remain with the actual 5,000 that should have been there. And in the same line, in the cash account, we're going to make an opposite entry of $5,000 on the debit side to cancel this 5,000 that was entered on the credit side. And then since these have cancelled each other, there is nothing remaining. So we have not yet corrected the error. So in the end, we need to make an entry of another $5,000 so that we now have a $10,000 on the debit side to correct this error. Now, what shall we enter in the journal? What we shall enter in the journal is this entry here and this entry there. We shall show that we need to credit the sales account with $10,000 and debit the cash account with $10,000. Let's see how it is done. So here we are saying we need to debit the cash account with $10,000 and credit the sales account with $10,000. being a sale of stock debited to sales account and credited to cash account, now corrected. So let's move on to yet another error. The next error is error number 7. Discount received from Kapota, a credit supplier, $2,000, was debited to the discount received account and credited to Kapota account. Completely the opposite. So let's see how this should actually be done. How was the error made? The error was made by, number 1, entering a $2,000 on the debit side of the discount received account and a $2,000 being entered on the credit side of Kapota account. So this should have been entered on the debit side, but it was not. And this amount, the $2,000 in the discount received account, should have been entered on the credit side, but it was not. So what shall we do to correct this error in the discount received account? We do so by canceling the first $2,000 that was made on the debit side by entering a $2,000 on the credit side. This will cancel the error, hence making the account to be at zero balance. Therefore, we now need to make an entry of the $2,000 that should have been there. Therefore, on the credit side, instead of entering a $2,000 only, we shall enter a $4,000. It's the same thing that we're going to do with Kapota account. The amount that was entered on the credit side should be cancelled by the first $2,000 on the debit side and by making an entry of another $2,000 on the same side, thus making an entry of $4,000. The first $2,000 cancelling this $2,000 error that was made, and the other $2,000 being the actual amount that should have been entered there. How will this be shown in the journal? We shall show this in the journal by simply picking this and picking that. Let's see how we do it. So we shall show that Kapota account should be debited with $4,000 and the discount received account should be credited with $4,000. Being discount received debited to discount received account and credited to Kapota account, now corrected. Let's move on to the next error. So what is an error of transposition? An error of transposition is one that happens where the digits in an amount are arranged in a wrong sequence. For example, where 597 is entered as 579. So there is a complete interchange in the positioning of the digits 9 and 7 there. Although this error occurs more commonly on one side of the double entry only, it may also occur on both sides. That's why it's been brought here. These errors may result in either an undercast or overcast of figures. And errors of transposition are corrected by either adding or subtracting the difference through debiting one account and crediting the other account. So let's see how this ought to be done. We are looking at part 7 and 8 of the question. Part 7 says, a sale on credit of $6,240 to Inonge had been entered in the books as $6,420. Let's take a look at this question. When you look at this question, we can actually clearly see that there is a transposition of figures. Let's look at 240 here, the last 3 digits, and the last 3 digits there. So 2 is supposed to come before 4, but in the way that it was entered, 4 came before 2, and so this caused an error where there was either an undercast or an overcast. So let's take a look at how this error was made. This error was made by making an entry on the debit side of 6,420 instead of 6,240. Hence, if you compare this figure with the actual figure that should have been there, we conclude that this figure was more by 180. Hence, this is an error of overcast. Therefore, in Inonge account, we are supposed to remove 180 from this side. How do we remove it? By making an opposite entry on the credit side of 180. In the sales account, the same thing was done. 6,420 was entered instead of 6,240. An overcast of $180. Therefore, to take away $180 from this side, we make an opposite entry on the debit side, thus correcting the error. In the journal, all that we are going to show are the correcting entries, and these are debit the sales account with 180 and credit Inonge account with 180, being the correction of error of overcast due to transposition of figures, now corrected. Let's take a look at the next part of the question. The next part of the question is part 8, which says a purchase by cash of 320 from Mwinga had been entered in the books as 230. So clearly we can see that there is a transposition here of the 2 and the 3. The positions have been altered. So 3 is supposed to come before 2, but in the way the figure was entered, 2 came before 3, hence creating an error. Well, let's take a look at how this was entered in the ledger accounts and how it ought to be corrected. In the cash account, we are showing that the error was made by entering 230 kwacha, or rather dollars, on the credit side of the cash account and $230 on the debit side of Mwinga account. What should have been on this side is 320. So all we need to do is find the difference and enter it on the same side. And the same difference should be entered on the same side of Mwinga account. The difference is $320 minus $230, which is 90. So this is an error of undercast. We are adding this to 230 and we are adding this to the 230 in Mwinga account, thus correcting the error. Now let's see how this ought to be entered in the journal. In the journal, all we are going to say is debit Mwinga account with $90 and credit the cash account with $90, being the correction of an error of undercast due to transposition of figures. Well, this is where we come to the end of this particular presentation. Look out for part 3 of 4 in this series where we discuss the errors reviewed by the trial balance. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you have benefited from the lesson. To watch more financial accounting videos, subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Accounting Tutor, Richard Fisonga, or like my Facebook page, Richard Fisonga, Teacher, Tutor. Thank you so very much and God bless you.